I think that it has kind of become a little bit of a joke that everybody during quarantine and everybody was stuck at home and everybody decided to start making bread. And I am certainly no exception to that. I started making bread during quarantine. I think I've gotten fairly good at it. I've made quite a few loaves now. And so I wanted to share that new skill with you during Talented Tuesday. So let me show you first the ingredients that we're going to be using. I'm just getting myself set up here. I was doing some work right before starting this, and so I did not get all myself completely in order. But let me show you what we're going to be using today. So the first thing is you're going to need yeast for bread. And I have this kind, it's Platinum Superior Baking Yeast from a company called Red Star. And I like it because it comes in these little packets. Yeast can go bad fairly quickly, so it's a good idea. It seems like a good idea, in my mind, to use these little packets which can stay closed until I need them. And one loaf of bread does not take very much yeast at all. And so I've been working on just this one packet for like almost 7 or 8 loaves. So you don't need a lot. You are also going to need sugar, regular old sugar, salt. I have like coarse sea salt. I don't think that this is required. It's just the type of salt that I buy, so it's what I have. And flour. And you can use whatever type of flour you'd like. I've never tried a gluten-free flour with this, so you might have to change the recipe if you're trying to make a gluten-free flour. But what I do is I make a half white, half wheat loaf. That has turned out really, really well for me. It's been absolutely delicious. And I use this brand. I have it in these plastic bags because flour is so messy. I use Crisota. And so I have this pretty small bag here of whole wheat flour and a very large bag, a 5-pound bag of just regular unbleached white flour. Just what kind of looks like this. There's no real brand preference for the bread. I just have Crisota because I like it, but you could use any type of flour you'd like without any problems. And you don't have to use half wheat and half white. You can do all white, all wheat. It doesn't really matter. It's just really a question of preference. So bear with me just one moment because I realized I left the recipe over by my couch. One second. That's really the type of day it's been, hasn't it? I'm losing my head and I'll forget where I put my glasses next. I actually probably already did forget where I put my glasses. Okay, so we're using a recipe today by a man named David Rakoff. He passed away not too long ago. He was a famous essayist and writer and kind of thinker. And his recipe was shared with me by one of my friends who is a really big fan of him. And there is an extremely famous no-knead bread recipe from the New York Times, which you may have heard of, by a man named Jim LaHaye, if I'm pronouncing his name right. And these two recipes are very, very similar, but David Rakoff's calls for a little bit of sugar, and I find that makes the bread a lot lighter and more delicious, and so I kind of prefer to use this recipe. And so that's what I'm going to be showing you today. So the thing about no-knead bread is it is extremely, extremely easy to make, but it requires time. So you're going to want to make this loaf, the absolute shortest amount of time it can take is 12 hours, but I think that most likely you're going to want at least 18 and up to 24 hours for this bread. So you want to make it the day before. And that's the biggest thing. That's the hardest part of this whole process. And so let's get started. The first thing that the recipe calls for is 3 cups of flour. And I'm going to use 1.5 cups of white flour and 1.5 cups of wheat flour, just because that's how I like my bread. So I've got my big old bowl. I got my measuring cup. And so I'm just going to do it. I guarantee you during this Talented Tuesday, I'm going to be covered in flour. I'm going to be a huge mess, so don't make fun of me too much, please. So I think this maybe is kind of shocking for somebody in baking to say, but I eyeball it. I'm not going to use a 1 cup and a 1/2 cup measure. I'm just going to use the 1 cup measure, and then I'm going to go back and like this looks like about a 1/2 cup to me. I'm just going to dump that in. Then I will put this flour aside, and I will get my wheat flour. And I cannot stick my 1 cup measuring cup into the wheat flour because the bag is too small, so I'm going to pour it. And I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to get about a cup. That's about a cup. And then I'm going to get about a half a cup. And yeah, that's about a half a cup. It's close enough, right? The bread will turn out well either way. All right, now I'll put that aside. The next thing that the recipe calls for is a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. And that's all that it needs. It's very, very little yeast, and the yeast gets real busy and it does its job and it just makes beautiful bread. You just don't need a lot of it. So like I said, I have these little packets because the yeast can go bad. It gets stale and like old and like a little bit harder to, what I've read is that it gets old and then it doesn't rise as well. So I just got these small packets so that I could kind of keep the yeast fresh longer in the, the other packets that I have aren't open. So that's why. So you take your 1/4 cup of yeast and you just sort of pour it into the flour. And then, let me look at my recipe to see how much. You're going to want 1½ tablespoons of salt. So, tablespoon. And I kind of eyeball this one as well because like 1½ I guess like the half a tablespoon measure. Actually, I don't even have a half a tablespoon measure. So that's 1 tablespoon. And that's like half. Good enough. It's kind of my philosophy for baking. I see I'm cutting my head off. I want you to see the bowl and my head, so I'm just going to kind of hunch down, I guess. I'll show you what it looks like. Okay. Next, we want a heaping teaspoon of sugar. So I got my sugar. This is my favorite substance on earth. And we want a heaping teaspoon. So, to me, that means a lot, and that's about it. Keep cutting my head off. Sorry, that's a little awkward. Nice to have a head. Okay. That's it for the dry ingredients. That's all you really need. So what I'm going to do is just take my spatula and sort of mix it all together. Just to kind of incorporate the yeast so it gets everywhere, incorporate the salt and the sugar. Now, at this stage, you can add anything else that you'd like. Common ingredients to add to bread would be Parmesan, rosemary, fresh rosemary, chives, garlic. If you roast the garlic for like 1 or 2 minutes, just like saute it for 1 or 2 minutes, and then put like the barely sauteed garlic into the bread, I did that once. That was really, really good. So anything extra you want to add, this is your moment. This is when you add it. And then, pretty much the last step to making the bread is to add 1 5/8 cup of water. 1 5/8 cup of water. Nobody has a 5/8 cup measurement. That's a ridiculous thing to even think about. So what I'm going to do is eyeball it. It's like basically a little more than 1½ cups. So give me 1 second to get my water and I'll be right back. All right, we got 1 cup. And then we got like a little more than ½ a cup. And pour that in. And then let me see, if I pull the bowl back, I think you'll probably be able to see pretty well. At first it looks really, really, really wet in here. I don't know if you can kind of tell, but just like tons of water. And then as you start to use your spatula to sort of incorporate the water, more and more, it looks really, really, really dry. And where it's going to end up being is just kind of mostly dry and very sticky. And it does not have to look like a loaf. It doesn't have to congeal really into like one big loaf. It's going to look like a lot of small, separate little balls almost for most of the time where you're stirring it. And the biggest thing is just that a lot of flour will sort of pool on the bottom of your bowl, and you just want to make sure you can incorporate that in. So you just kind of want to go until you get it all. And if it does look too dry, like you really cannot get all of the flour incorporated in, which you can kind of see here, I have this little section of, well, I don't know how well you can see it, but I have like one little section of flour that just will not fold in. So I'm going to add the tiniest little bit more water. So 1 second. Just like a little bit more. And that should about do it. So you don't even really need to stir for that long. I'm just about done. And what was that, like a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes? And that's it. Like that's, well, there's still a little bit of flour here at the bottom. Let me just get all that. Yeah, okay. And that's it. And then I have some flour. It's really sticky and it's going to hang off my spatula. So I'm just going to kind of get it off and incorporate it into the dough. And let me show you what this looks like. So I think I'm just going to lift you guys up and make it, like if you can kind of get the sense of how it looks, like it's not one really big mass, although it does come together really fast, but there's like, you know, nooks and crannies and like little separate balls and, you know, just like lightly mixed. And it's going to come together on its own. It just takes, you know, it's going to rest for a long time and it's just going to kind of congeal into an actual dough ball by itself. So what you do is you take plastic wrap and you put it over your bowl and you put this bowl aside for 18 hours. And about halfway through those 18 hours, you're going to come and take your spatula and just sort of poke at it and just sort of like you fold it on itself once or twice. That's about 9 hours in. But it's really forgiving. You can do that 12 hours in, 15 hours in. It's not a problem. It's just like whenever you're around and available. You just sort of fold it on itself. And other than that, you just let it rest for, you know, 18 hours is a really good amount of time. I've done it as long as 24 and it was fine. I've never done it as low as 12 hours, but the recipe says you can. So 12 hours would be the absolute minimum. 18 is better. And, hey Amy, I see you. So then you take this and you put it somewhere warm in your apartment. It has to be warm because that activates the yeast, and the yeast starts doing its thing and actually turning it into beautiful bread. So my apartment is really hot. I live on the 3rd floor. I don't have air conditioning. I can literally put it anywhere and it's going to be just fine. So I'm just going to put it there. And I'm going to get the bread that I made yesterday so you can see what it looks like after it's been resting. So this is my beautiful bread, which I'm about to cook for you guys. So this bread I made yesterday about 7 p.m. So it's been actually about 22 hours. This morning before I went to work at about 9 a.m., I gave it those couple folds and stirs. And that really like shrinks the bread. It looks really, you know, it gets bigger with the yeast. And then you fold it and stir it a couple times and it looks really small. And it bounces back. So you can kind of see on this one, I'm just going to lift you guys up. You can see how it looks. It is definitely like a big, glorious bread, kind of bubbling. You're going to see, when you start to see small bubbles along the top, that's when you know that it's good and it's getting ready. And it's going to be really delicious. So that is kind of what it looks like right before you're going to bake it. And there's another step you need to take before you're going to bake it. The first thing you need to do is have your oven preheated to 450 degrees. And once that happens, you're going to take, one other thing you need for this recipe, you need something to bake the bread in. A Dutch oven, a cast iron skillet that has a lid, something really heavy duty that is oven safe, that is pretty thick, that can bake the bread. So I am using a Dutch oven. And I have friends who've used cast iron skillets that have lids. So something along those lines. So I preheated the oven to 450 degrees. And then I put my Dutch oven in there. Once it hits 450 degrees, you put your Dutch oven in the oven empty, and you let that be for a half hour. And it just heats up. The Dutch oven gets so hot, and you don't want to put the bread in the Dutch oven until the Dutch oven is so hot, otherwise it's going to stick and burn. But when it's so hot like that, it like basically just starts cooking immediately, and it's not going to burn and it's not going to stick. It'll come out really, really easily. So, it's just about ready, actually. So I'm going to go ahead. Yeah, what time? Yeah, it's ready. So come with me to my oven, and I'm going to get this extremely hot. I have, God, I keep cutting off my head. I have burned myself every single time I've done this. So let's see what's going to happen today. It could go either way. Got my oven mitts. This. All right. Wish me luck. It's so hot. It's so hot. Oh, God. Okay, this is my extremely hot Dutch oven. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully take the lid off. And I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of flour at the bottom of the pot because that does keep, I mean, the bread's probably not going to stick anyway, but if it does stick, the flour will stop it. So, I'm just going to take my bag of flour and I'm going to stick, I'm just literally going to hand sprinkle it, no utensils needed. Like I said, I'm going to get really messy during this. And move this aside, and I'm going to get my bread. And I'm going to get another spatula. Oh. I don't know where my other spatula is, so I'm just going to use this spatula. And you basically just plop the bread into the Dutch oven. Like, it's nothing fancy. It doesn't have to go in a perfect round circle because it's going to spread out throughout the baking process. And it's going to be an oval or a circle no matter what you do, so you really can't mess this stage up. So you just sort of take it and you sort of put it in, scrape all the scrapings, and like, there you go. And then there is one extra very important step, and that is to put salt on the top of the bread. It is the most delicious thing you're ever going to eat. So I get my salt, and I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit on the top of the bread. My grandma swears by using olive oil and putting the olive oil on and then the salt. I have found that makes for a crust that's too thick for me. I don't like a really thick crust. If you do like a really thick crust, put some olive oil, then put the salt, and you'll be really happy. And then what you do is put your lid back on, put it back in the oven without burning yourself if you can. It's very challenging. And I'm going to set the timer for a half hour. After a half hour, I'm going to go back in there and I'm going to take the lid off. And then I'm going to bake it a further 15 minutes without the lid. And then it's going to be done. Maybe 10 to 15 minutes. Sometimes I only do 10. It depends on how dark it's getting. And that's it. That is how you make the bread. So it's an incredibly easy process. The only step that requires anything is just the patience of waiting for it to be ready to bake. Now, I have had some situations. I said that it's pretty rare that the bread will stick to the bottom of the Dutch oven. I have had some situations where it has. So when I take the Dutch oven out and I try to get the bread out, it's stuck and I have to like prying at it and I can't do it. And the trick for that is if you notice that happen, like you take the Dutch oven out, the bread won't come out, then just put the lid back on top of the Dutch oven for about 5 to 10 minutes. Not in your oven, just outside your oven, put the lid back on. And it's going to get humid in there. For whatever reason, it gets humid. And then the humidity will loosen the bread from the bottom. And after about 5 to 10 minutes, you should be able to go in and the bread will come up without being stuck anymore, which makes it really easy. And that's it. So I'm not going to stay here for 45 minutes while the bread bakes, but as soon as the bread is done, I will post a picture of it so you guys can see. And then the bread that we also just started, this loaf is going to rest until tomorrow, probably about 2 p.m. tomorrow, maybe 1 p.m. tomorrow before I bake it. And I'll put a picture of this loaf as well so you guys can see it. If there are any questions, you can ask them in the chat right now, or I will answer them if you watch this later, if you have a question that you think of later. Go ahead and ask it in the chat, and I will answer it. And thanks so much, everybody. It makes me so happy to eat this bread and to share this bread with you. It is one of the most delicious things in the world. So with that, I will say goodbye. Thanks.